Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's live discussion on The Expanse, Season 3, Episode 7, Delta V. Apologize for those in the chat. Been waiting for like a half an hour. I've been having a lot of serious computer issues. Computer's been messing up, so hopefully it behaves itself during this live stream and I don't disappear, but if you do, you know why. But anyway, joining me to talk about this great episode is Darrin from D's Reviews. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey, Mark. Hey, everyone in the chat. Thank you so much for your patience. I know we get a little late delay going on, but Skynet sometimes makes choices for us of when we can get things going. But yeah, really excited to be here. It was a great episode. Really enjoyed. I enjoyed the transition. I think they did a great move from last week to this week beautifully well. So yeah, let's dive in. Let's get this going.
Absolutely. So I guess I don't know. See, I'm really curious to get your perspective from on this episode for someone who haven't read the books, because for me, someone who has, I kind of knew what was coming. I knew what the kind of the characters that were being introduced. But from your perspective, did this seem like a good, did it seem like very jarring? Like suddenly we switched gears to like a completely different story with a bunch of different characters? Because I could imagine that's how it might seem to some people.
Actually, and yeah, I was talking in the chat a little bit of this while we were waiting. I actually love that they did this transition, because my feel is that, and I think you had alluded to it during one of the discussions, is the last week was the end of one of the books, and this is basically the beginning of another one. And normally you would do that as like a season finale. That's how you would separate that out. I'm actually really glad they did it in the middle of the season. I love the pacing of that they did with season 2 and everything. Going in through this, I was really excited to find where they were going, and I love the adventure with Prax and the kind of shifting of the crew feel that went there. And it did. It felt like that mission was over with. So starting it now, one, I don't have to wait a year, especially the way things are going now, to see what's going to happen. I get re-engaged with the changing of the storyline, and I like the fact that there's an amount of time that has passed. We're seeing what are the long-term effects of the whole adventure to save Praxis and the whole really kind of Earth-Mars war. And now we get to go on to the next stage. So I'm really glad they actually did this mid-season. I think it kept things from getting drawn out. And I know that I've got a good chunk of episodes now to get back into the swing of things and get really excited before they end up, breaking for the season.
Yes, breaking for the season, definitely. That's what they're gonna do.
That's what we're saying.
But yeah, well, yeah, that's good to hear. I know this episode did feel kind of like a season premiere, because last week when I was with Avkin and Don, we were talking about how last week's episode felt like a season finale, and I think this week's episode in many ways feels like a season premiere. And that is interesting that they do it like mid-season like that. I think Avkin mentioned last week that Mr. Robot did something kind of similar in their last season as well, where there was like a mid-season shift. Yeah, so I think it's an interesting way to do it. I just thought maybe perhaps like some of the characters were, in new situations, were introduced too fast, or that the time jump would be a bit jarring, where all of a sudden Naomi's not in the ship and all of a sudden Bobby Draper is somewhere else, and Prax is gone. But you like that? You thought it was all handled really well?
Well, yeah, because like I said, I could see that there were still a few episodes ahead of me to get used to things. And to me, it wasn't so much. I mean, we were catching up with our crew and, with where everybody has gone in the past 6 months, a little bit more than in between the two, the last episode and this one. So we got, and I love the whole drummer bit. I've been enjoying her character. So now that she's got a little bit more, Naomi's over there with her, that's kind of a perfect sort of pairing. We got sort of like, all right, girls are getting together and they're kicking some butt here. We get the Rossi, the fact that there's a documentary crew. I mean, that's only 2 more characters to kind of get used to. And it's really, to me, the most shocking part was to realize that it's just the 3 of them left on the Rossi. It feels like a light crew. And even though we have Holden talking about, no, Naomi's coming back, she's just on a little leave, it's going to be fine. You can really feel that there is kind of a level of emptiness with them. I'm not even entirely sure what their job is right now. They say that they're running cargo or something, but they didn't seem to be kind of on that wavelength. So, and then just with the background with the alien stuff, I thought that yeah, it was obviously our new introduction. They were pacing it. They were just setting things up. But I didn't feel overwhelmed. I didn't feel lost at any point.
Yeah, cool. So there's mixed reactions in the chat. Trone said it was quite jarring binging it. I was like, where did everyone go? And Belinda said, as a book reader, I was fine with it. I love how they're breaking up the seasons. And Deanna says, I was actually disappointed with this episode. It seemed rushed and disjointed. And Colonel Doomsday said he had to watch it a couple of times to get what was happening and who was who. And I get all of those perspectives. I think it makes sense. Like, I personally wasn't lost because I'd read the books and I sort of knew the characters and where they were going with everything. But I can see how it might be feeling a bit disjointed to some. But yeah, that's interesting. So let's go ahead and get into the specific storylines. Let's start. Let's start with the Avasarala speech we get at the start of the episode, because apparently now she's the Secretary General. Gillis is out, and this episode didn't explain why. It didn't explain. It says, "Oh, we thank him for his service." So obviously he stepped down graciously. It wasn't like he wasn't disgraced or anything like that. But we don't know if it was his choice to step down or if he was pushed out. That maybe Avasarala knew that he was a spineless scum and found some leverage to push him out, but so he could save face publicly. And I hope this is something that they touch on in future episodes. And then, of course, it also orientates that she's trying to bring the three superpowers, Earth, Mars, and the Belt together and a peaceful. So the war is over, and they're now moving forward to deal with the huge threat of the protomolecule jellyfish, or whatever you want to call it, that came off of the thing. And while she's talking, we see this thing moving and forming into a giant ring. And so that's sets the stage for this episode, because there's this huge ring out near, like in the outer solar system, near the orbit of Uranus. And yes, I like to call it Uranus to avoid any of those stupid jokes. But anyway, so that's our new situation that we have going here. So, Darrin, what were some of your thoughts on this? Avasarala, the ring, any of that stuff?
I thought it was our quick catch up of what's happened in the past 6 months. I thought it encapsulated it very well. Yes, Belinda. Yeah, I was noticed that the Avasarala did not look happy about really any of that of what she is doing. But you could see that this is kind of the natural position that she would be put in. She is the one that was fighting for peace. She uncovered Aaron Wright's deception. That the old Secretary General couldn't last. That makes sense. You could see that he was just kind of pushed away. Yeah, it was a little. I mean, I could see where you'd say the episode did feel a little rushed, but to me, because of the pacing they've sort of maintained, because this is sort of right in the middle of the season and they want to start building towards some big excitement before they end things out, I felt this was the quickest way they could fill in all of those gaps while still introducing and setting up things for the future. I totally believe that we're going to get flashbacks and discussions and get a little more illumination on what has happened. But it reminded me a lot in some ways of like Starship Troopers and such, where we have the political discussion in towards the camera and that kind of interaction that catch me up. Do you want to know more? Which I really enjoyed. Plus, like I said, this seems like a natural position that Avasarala would end up being put in, and I like the whole uniting humanity to fight the real threat. It's a smart move.
Yeah, absolutely. In the chat, Colonel Doomsday says, "Good luck, bobblehead."
Exactly.
And All Your Money says the ring beyond Uranus. That's the actual label. Let's see. There was something else I saw in the chat. Oh yeah, all your money says the only thing I would have wanted was more info on the Secretary General resigning and more Avasarala. And I actually agree, but I'm hoping I'll be okay with it if we get more in the coming episodes, if they explain more what happened to Gillis and why Avasarala, because that was the only thing that felt a bit rushed to me. Like I would have liked to see more transition into how she's the Secretary General now.
Yeah, I could, like I said, I could totally see that. I do think we're going to find out a little bit more information as that goes on, because we want the focus to be of what's happening at the ring. That's where all the other energy of the rest of the episode was focusing at. So with Earth, this is going to be the only kind of Earth stuff we're getting. I mean, even Anna is out by the ring now. There's nobody else in Earth except for Avasarala. We've never really touched on with Mars. You know, I'm sure we'll get a little bit more Belt because that's closer. So that's good. That'll be the backstory that they'll kind of put in through the next few episodes to kind of illuminate that out, so that we still get a little bit of Avasarala throughout the rest of the season. Because, like I said, I really feel they're pushing it out, and I know we'll get to it, but especially the way that it ends, I can see that they're really setting up for a whole new. Okay, we got 6 episodes left or 5 episodes left. It's going to be a ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to make a correction from my review of this episode that I did, because in the spoilers section of that review, I said that it seemed like Bobby Draper was on Mars, but one of my commenters pointing out that she's not on Mars anymore. She said she had visited Mars, but she's now on a Martian ship going towards the ring. So basically, they're all going in the same direction. Like Holden, Naomi, they're all on their way towards the ring. So it does make me wonder if they're not good, because just to get into the novels thing, Avasarala isn't really in book 3 at all. So she sort of just steps it out because she's not by the ring, and all the action takes place by the ring. So it makes me wonder if the show's going to be the same way, or because the show's always changed, though. The show seems to always like to spread out the story a bit more and show different locations. So I'm still unclear on whether or not they will do more with Avasarala, or maybe she'll just take a back seat for the rest of the season and not be in it very much at all.
Well, yeah, as I said, it does feel like all the energy is going in that direction. I think this is the way that they can keep this actress engaged. And I'm sure that there'll be some political stuff. There might be some, discussion over wavelength that she has to talk with Mars or the Belt, or, who knows, Anna and her might end up getting a connection. I don't know how the books go, so I'm not sure if they may adapt certain characters or have her play somebody else's role. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think all of our political background is going to be how they're keeping her in the show for the rest of the season, because otherwise, like you said, that she wouldn't have anything else to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, from a book perspective, I don't really see that there's a character she could take the place of, but I could see that they could invent a storyline for her that's sort of relevant to what's going on, which is what they did with her in season 1, because she wasn't in book 1 at all either. And they sort of invented something for her to do. And I could see them doing that here, or they could just not have her in the rest of the season. Right. We'll see how that goes. And just to clarify, because people in the chat are talking about this, there's 6 episodes left, because there's 13 in the season total. And this was
okay, good. I had my count right then. Excellent. Yeah. And as I said, that's perfect, because this was 7, and this is our transition. We had 6 barreling through the end of the last book, or the last storyline. This is our transition episode, so they can really hit the ground running, starting next, I think, with the reaction and how everyone is now going to respond to this obvious new development with the ring.
Cool. All right, let's go ahead and move over and talk about the Rocinante, which I do believe they're calling it Rocinante again. We don't have to worry about that Pinus Contorta BS. Never liked calling that anyway. So this is another thing that felt kind of, so this is, I guess, like they clarify in the subtitle, it's 187 days after the ring formed, and that's about 6 months, bit over 6 months, but they don't specify how long it's been after the last episode of the ring forming, so it could be potentially longer. than that. So it's been at least half a year, maybe 8 months or more.
Right.
Since, and we catch up with the Rocinante crew and all. And this, to me, is what I felt a bit rushed, because in the novels they take a lot more time to explain this lawsuit on Mars, that Mars is finally against Rocinante, and why the documentary team are there filming them. And but in this episode, they just all of a sudden the documentary team are there, and through their dialogue they sort of give you exposition on why they're there, because Mars is suing them over the ship. And this is something they kind of hinted at through the season, because every time they run into Martians, they call it the Tachi, and like, oh, you stole that Tachi from us. So it does make total sense that they'd be suing them to try to get the ship back. But Amos brings up a good point where he says, well, we just saved their whole world, so it's kind of petty of them to worry about one ship.
Yeah, well, I think that was I think the best point right there is I did see it brought up, and I know Bobby later on in her discussion with Alex, kind of throws support to the Rossi crew, which he should. But to me, it is one of those, and not knowing the books, I don't know the bigger background that this might entail or storylines. But it does seem kind of ridiculous. It's like, hi, we just stopped this war, and you want to argue about this ship, which could be argued as salvage. I mean, on the other end of it, I mean, I know we'll get into it. It's not like the behemoth there. You got a whole bunch of Mormons going after them saying, return our ship, when that one was basically stolen. I mean, so, it's kind of an interesting, it's funny, and it feels political, but I didn't put a whole lot of attachment to it. I figured I'm hoping this isn't going to be a big thing going forward, because yeah, it does seem really petty to argue about the possession of a single warship with the crew that basically just stopped the war.
I mean, I think its main purpose in the story at the moment is to explain why there's a documentary team on board, because the obvious, like, Holden and Amos don't want them there at all. And so it explains that they're paying for their legal fees, basically. And so that's why they're forced to sort of put up with it. And I think it does actually, it makes sense though, that because I mentioned in my read, this is the first time in the show. It was different in the books, but in the show, this is the first time we actually see the crew as a legitimate crew. Like you mentioned before, you're not sure what the Rocinante is doing, but I think they're basically their own official little company. They're their own ship now, and they go out and do jobs for money or whatever. And they probably could have been more clear on that, but that's kind of the impression I got. And so they're officially recognized by Earth and the Belt, but Mars not so much. And so that's where they're having their issues with. And they did mention, Holden did mention, and this is a nice little touch from the books as well, that they each of them own an equal share in the ship, so they split it in quarters. And he's including Naomi in that, even though she's not on the ship anymore, which was a nice touch.
Sure, and don't get me wrong. I think as a storyline and explaining everything, yes, it makes sense that Mars would still argue about this, and who knows what the political advantage they would have of thus having the Rocinante in their own position, as just, I don't know, tourism or something. But no. As I said, it makes sense that they're doing it. I just think, from a bigger picture type of standpoint, I have to agree with Amos. This does seem like a silly lawsuit. But if it explains and gets everybody on board and gets everybody in their position, that works great. And yeah, I know they're an actual ship doing actual jobs. I'm just not sure if they figured out what those jobs are going to be yet. But I love the fact that they are all equal partners, whether Naomi is there or not. It's it's like old pirate ships. Everybody gets an even share. Here, the captain doesn't get more. Everybody gets an even share.
Yeah. But there was one thing I do agree that wasn't sort of made very clear or handled very well, is what the Rocinante is doing at the moment. I mean, they kind of mentioned, like in the newscast, that crazy Punk belter. Oh, we'll get to him shortly. But the newscast that he was watching said, "Oh, hero of the belt goes to the ring." So I get the impression that he was and when they show the Rocinante, they're with a UN fleet, which may seem a bit weird. So I get the impression they're officially going as like a UN representative, but also someone who represents the belt, because they call him hero of the belt. So someone who sort of brings them in there, sort of representing that faction of the ring. That's kind of what I get, but I think they should have been a bit more clear about that.
Yeah, no, they're totally there for political reasons. When I saw the broadcast, that's sort of what it felt. It was like, hey, yeah, the ring. Well, the hero of the belt's coming. Is going to check it out. He'll be there in case anything goes down. It does feel very much like a public relations move as opposed to necessarily anything practical. And for the crew of the Rossi, they've got nothing else they're doing right now. And I think that's what we may find out is the frustration of now that they weren't doing all of that crazy, exciting save the belt stuff. They didn't know what to do with themselves. That's sort of what I get the feeling of. Is in a way, it's like, yeah, we're here, but we're just here. We got Amos putting together his Prax panels, which was awesome. Oh, I loved all that. Amos moments. Alex is trying to, he's kind of connecting with his family, or at least his kid a little bit, but his wife's divorcing him. It's they all, even Holden feels like he's just going through the motions on the ship and checking this and cleaning this and just wandering half bored with his cup of coffee.
Yeah, but that's a good point about this being there for publicity, because the documentary team on board was sort of goes along with that sort of theme. But yeah, I agree with you. That scene with Amos where he was talking about Prax and he calls him Prax Plants and says he's my best friend in the whole world.
I know that. Yeah, that got me so much. I mean, last week's episode when Prax tells May is like he's my best friend I've ever had. It was just, that's great. They've had this bonding. It's nice to have it. And now, I mean, it makes sense that Prax isn't there. We don't really need him. And with May, why put him in any danger? It's great where he is. But it's nice to kind of continue that little feel and yeah, that it has had such an effect on Amos. I think it's a great character evolution for him, and it gives him that little bit of reticence, kind of float in his head, like, wow, I did have a best friend, somebody who considered me their best friend. It's just, for someone like Amos, that feels like a big move.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it was something that will sort of inform his character. And also, in some ways, and we talked about this last week, in some ways, Prax was sort of a replacement for Naomi because he felt betrayed by Naomi. And she was his rock, but then Prax became his good friend. And now, sort of, I think his main rock is the Rocinante itself, and Holden and Alex and the whole crew. So yeah, that was cool. Now, do you think that Prax is gone from the show, at least temporarily? That he's out of the story now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as I said, I especially with how protective Amos was and the crew of getting to save May and how much that was I think involving them back out into around where the ring is, that's just putting them in danger. What, you're going to risk May becoming, an orphan again? They just saved him. So yeah, it's one of those things, there might be some connection that has to happen at a point. But I think the crew of the Rossi would actively avoid involving him just because they don't want to endanger him. Someone else that comes in that has to be there for whatever reason, they'll take on. But I think there was something kind of special in that relationship. So, I mean, I'll miss him. I like the character, but I just think, as a reflection of his importance, this crew would protect him and thus not really want to get him involved in anything dangerous, especially with May there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I agree that his storyline is sort of completed. It had a really nice, great ending, and sort of to bring him back would kind of just go against that. I think so. But again, this was a nice tribute to him, and maybe we'll get more appearances from him, but as a main character, I think his storyline's kind of finished in that regard. And then we also get the scene where Monica Stewart, who is the name of the documentarist, the reporter, investigator, however you want to call her, she was interrogating, and rather than interviewing, she was like interrogating Amos and asking him and digging. And it was obvious she was setting him up because she was asking him questions she already knew the answer to, and she was basically revealing that he was basically a mob boss in Baltimore before he signed up to go on these ships, and that he kind of used his illegitimate position in order to get into space in the first place. And I love, of course, they're filming him really close up with this remote control camera, and it was so obvious that he was just gonna smash the camera, but I totally loved that. I mean, that was so Amos. In fact, that's actually tame for Amos, and I think Monica is lucky because she doesn't know how dangerous he is. But yeah, I love that scene. I thought that was great.
Oh no! Well, anything with Amos is really kind of tends to be my favorite one. But yeah, it was. Well, and I love that too because again, it's stuff that we as an audience know, and then all of a sudden, it's more stuff that we didn't know. And I liked how there was sort of that build. Also, knowing that you're kind of interrogating Amos from an audience standpoint, that's not going to end well. I do think that he reacted much more calmly than I expected him to, because yeah, he smashed it, and then he was just kind of right back to himself. But we have the documentary crew. I mean, as we bring up, I do not trust them at all. Okay. There's definitely some other agenda going on. I find it interesting that they're very quick to play the sex card, either one of them. Yeah. In order to try and get some more information. I mean, what did she tell after that whole scene? Then she's looking at Amos is like, I bet you're chatty after sex, huh? Aren't you? How about we come on and then the cameraman goes up. Well, it didn't work with him. Do I have a chance? I find it really interesting. They're quick to kind of get play that card for their information. So I mean, for the record, I don't trust the documentary crew. I really think that they're up to something else.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting to hear. Like, I get the impression with Monica Stewart in particular that she's just trying to antagonize them to get a good story, and she's antagonizing the hell out of them and trying to get a rise out of Amos, and offering sex is just another way to do that. And with Holden, like, he recognized that she was just saying stuff to try to piss him off. And he's like, I see what you're doing. You try to piss me off, so I'm just going to ignore you, which I thought was a nice moment because Holden was a bit smarter than Amos, who just smashed the camera. And it's interesting that Alex doesn't mind talking to him. It was like, hey, I'll talk whatever you like. And that instantly makes him not interesting to her. She's not interested to Alex because he's willing to cooperate. But then again, she doesn't mind spying on him and filming his private conversations with Bobby Draper.
Well, yeah, I think from a documentary standpoint, if you're willing to interact, then you're trying to put on a show. And that's not what she's interested in. She's more interested, like I said, in the spying, those quiet, honest moments where the camera isn't on or somebody doesn't want to interact. I can see where her style would really work. With the, like you said, from the antagonistic standpoint. I did love that Holden did spot that and immediately shut her down, because again, it's not only different ways the crew is reacting to having the camera around and this documentary crew around, but it also reinforces Holden's position and why he is captain, that he's insightful, that he's intelligent, that he's not easily thrown off his guard. I like seeing that from his position, because then when we do see those vulnerable moments, they make them even more real.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think you're right. That is what she's trying to do with Alex. That's why he's not interested in the show. She wants to get some real moments with him. In the chat, Alex is talking about how it reminds him of this documentary episodes of Stargate SG-1 and Battlestar Galactica. And I was actually thinking about that because before, when I read the books and I knew that Monica Stewart and all of them were being in the show, I was worried that it would be like this. And Babylon 5 did an episode like this too, which I just watched recently, where it's done from the perspective of a newscast or documentary team, and they show the interviews and stuff. And I actually hate that format. I find it reeks of like reality TV and comes off a bit cheesy to me. So I thought The Expanse might do a full-on episode all about that. But I actually liked the way they actually handled it better, because it had that same sort of feel, but you didn't get that cheesy, gimmicky effect that I think those other shows did, which I was worried about. So I actually like this episode better than any of those other episodes you bring up.
Well, yeah, because they always pull you out of it. Whenever they do that documentary episode, because it feels so different from everything else that you see with the show, it always feels a little false. It always feels a little off. It never really feels honest. With this one, it's better because they can jump back and forth. You can see what their camera is doing, what is it that the documentary crew is focusing on, and what's going on all around. I'm sure we're going to get to it, but the Alex Bobby scene.
Yeah, we can get to that now if you like.
Yeah. I thought was really well done with this, because we're seeing a lot of that dimensional connection between Bobby and Alex, which I thought was great, because again, you have characters that were antagonistic at points together, now very friendly, very supportive, recognizing the time that they've said together. Even Bobby, like I said, mentioning, I know it's not popular here, but the Rossi, I believe, is yours. You guys have earned this. There's a lot of great transition between those two characters, which, shot the way that normally the show is normally shot, has a lot of that feel to it. But throwing in those little documentary standpoints, we can see where Monica is focusing on. Just the reaction on Alex there from the side of the face, almost sort of hidden, I thought was really what made it very personal. It was almost a very quiet moment within that, and the small focusing. So it was great, because we got to see how they normally craft the show, and then we get to see what a documentarian would think about. What are those quiet little background where the camera is that specifically chooses different shots than we normally get. And I like that interaction.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like the way this is handled as opposed to the way those other shows handled, it was less intrusive and stayed more true to the kind of feel that we're used to getting from the show, but still had added that extra element to it. So I agree. I really liked the way it was handled. Yeah. But we do see that the cameraman, we do get the scene of him off on his own, being a little shifty. You talked about them not trusting them. Well, it seems like he was kind of up to no good. Like he was looking up things that about the ship. That why would he be doing that?
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I don't trust this crew. Even, I mean, he does that, and then he does the other where he's backing around. He can see he's coming up to different sections of the ship. Oh, I'm just checking my camera, and now I'm going to send it up to go look at other areas. So that's why it really feels like there's an alternate agenda here, not just antagonizing for the sake of getting raw footage, which might be more of what Monica's doing. But the cameraman, those last sequences, I think, definitely show that there is much more happening from his end. Whether she knows, she's aware of it or not, can't totally be sure with. Yeah,
totally. And Belinda in the chat says that there's been a few episodes that she didn't like, but she loved this one. Oh, well, that's interesting. I think the Rossi storyline really worked for me. Maybe it did feel a bit rushed at the start, but I did think for the most part we got the real gel. But anyway, let's get to the big news. The big news here. Holden goes for a shower. He gets out of here, someone muttering to himself, and we look, and there is Miller. And he's basically just spouting gibberish or just reciting lines that he said before. Like all the lines he said in this scene were lines he said earlier episodes, earlier in the show. And then he's gone. I actually don't have much to say about it because I don't want to get into spoilers. So if you want to go ahead and give your thoughts on how you reacted to this scene.
Yeah, well, again, that was the kind of shock. That was our little end. That's where we know, I mean, between this and the racer sequence, this is where we see that we're entering into the next really kind of big stage of storytelling. And that was, to me, that was just the teaser. Yes, you have questions, of course. Did they really want to bring this actor back? Is there actual meat for this story? Yeah, I see it as a larger thing, especially as the proto-molecule or the machine, depending on one's point of view, is being more activated now. There seems to be a reason of why this other life form that was integrated in the machine that had gotten so close to the Druli-Ma proto-molecule being would be used as a way of communication or something like that. So again, I don't know where it's going. I know that there's a couple of possibilities, but to me, that was the indication that stuff is happening now. This is the next step that's going on. This is what's going to obviously really pull the Rossi crew back into the thick of things.
So you don't think it's likely that this is just a delusion and it's just in Holden's head?
No, I didn't get that impression at all. I know that's sort of what he reacted and how he thought that maybe something was going on, but there's been no indication of why Holden would have that particular reaction. He's not prone to delusions. He wasn't particularly connected to Miller. I mean, in some ways, I think there eventually was some level of respect, but I'm not sure if they ever really liked each other that much. So yeah, I didn't see that there would be a reason why within Holden this would be something coming out. To me, this is specifically a reaction from the proto-molecule coming into some next level, and whether this is an outreach of the molecule itself or a remnant of Miller trying to warn or something, yeah, that's waiting to be seen. But I didn't see this at all as anything delusional from Holden's viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a bit too coincidental that Miller just happened to appear like right after the Belter slammed into the ring. So that, yeah.
yeah.
It seems like there should be a connection there. So yeah, hold on. Just back in the chat, Deanna's actually having the opposite opinion of Belinda. Belinda saying that she liked all the episodes, but this first one she didn't like. And that's interesting. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to get all these points of views. I personally, this is one of my better episodes, I think. Like, there's a few episodes in season 1 in particular, like right in the middle of the season, to me, which didn't really work. To me, I would actually say this is one, maybe not one of the best, but definitely one of the better episodes. I did really enjoy this. Yeah, so that's interesting getting that perspective. But anyway, any other thing on Miller or the Rocinante crew before we move on?
No. I think this felt. I mean, and like I said, I can get the reactions both ways of the episode for that, because it's a transition episode. Do they handle it quickly to get back into the thick of things, or they drag thing out and focus on more character work? One, they've set the characters up nicely, so you don't have to do a whole lot to have them really fill the space, which I thought was nice. There's a lot of activity that they want to cover over, so if they move quickly, it allows to keep the story forward. So yeah, it's kind of a balance. They got great character. We're already invested with things, so that helps with the speed of stuff. But like I said, I think that like any transition, it's whether you're interested in the transition or you just want to get to the next level. That's usually how you tend to respond.
I actually think this was handled better than the transition into book 2 in the midpoint of season 2. To me, those couple episodes where they finished the book 1 storyline and they started the book 2 storyline, to me those were a bit slower and took more time to get going, whereas here almost had, I guess, the opposite issue where it was almost a bit too fast. But I actually kind of like that better because we sort of get right into the thick of things and not take too much time to sort of catch our breaths, but enough time, in my opinion. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about that Belter, because I forgot to mention him. The crazy guy who's playing he's apparently like an extreme, I refer to him as like an extreme sports type person. Like, he goes around, does these slingshots around planets. out for publicity and sets all these records and gets all these news, and he likes to be this huge hero. And of course, we get this backstory of his girlfriend back on series. It was hilarious. Just like, apparently, she was because he wasn't getting the publicity that he used to, because everyone's worried about the ring. They're all worried about this per molecule ring, and everyone's talking about the ring. And so he's not a big star anymore, and so she sleeps with his brother. And that scene was hilarious. You just see him walk by in the Speedo going, "You take care of yourself."
It's so cold. It's so cold. Yeah, I mean, really, very much in your face. It's like, and then the fact that he's still pining over her after he's like, obviously you're calling me from my brother's place just afterwards, because he's wandering around in just a Speedo, if that. Yeah, it was, yeah, it was fun. Obviously, this was a character that was to introduce us to our next move. I didn't know what it was, but we didn't get a lot of backstory, just kind of enough to show that, yeah, he's a crazy street racer of the future, planetary racer. Yeah, it was, I don't know. I loved the bit. It was a great character bit. It was a lot of fun. And the way it ended, I thought, was just stunning. That was that shot of him. I was surprised he wasn't shot at all. I mean, I know that they got the warning, but they can let him get really close. I mean, obviously all the way close.
Well, I think they didn't want to shoot down someone who was just having engine malfunctions. This is what he was pretending to do until he got too close where they couldn't do anything about it. He's like, "Ah, screw you, Duster."
He's done this before. But yeah, it was kind of perfect because we got into it. We got a reason why we liked the character. We were, we could see his motivation. He's getting back with this girl, and he finds out that, yeah, she's very excited about this new choice that he's doing, just to spur him on a little bit more. And then splat. That was just that. I mean, that was the money shot to me of the episode right there. Right. I mean, it was scary, it was gory, it was sad, and I think really conveyed the drasticness of this episode. The fact that the ship wasn't crushed, it was slowed, it was caught, and he was the one that kept going to perfect end effect. Like I said, that's why this episode worked, I think, so well as the transition. I think they did do its pacing right. Yes, we'll have to do a little catch up, but they'll sneak that in for the next few episodes from character standpoint. You wanted to get to this point. We didn't want to spend 3 episodes of watching the ring being built or people traveling to the ring or any of that. This makes the danger real and immediate now, and I think that last scene perfectly framed it for that.
Yeah, and I will say this, bringing up the books again, his little scene was the prologue of book 3, so it's also what set up the storyline, seeing the Belter do the kamikaze run. But the show actually goes into more detail about this character. Like, we didn't get a thing about his girlfriend in the book, so I actually like the way it was handled here better. I was actually worried about them mishandling this and it coming off as hokey, but I think it came off as great. It was funny, but at the same time, you could understand his motivations. You could feel for him that he was losing his fame and his power, and he was obsessed with this girl. And of course, like, the fact that once he told her about his plan, she's like, "Oh, I'll totally love you and come back to you if you pull this off." So that's just push. And she's poison. She is so poison.
Well, yeah, and I think that was the perfect use of the character. You didn't, going into a whole lot more backstory wasn't going to be rewarding. Its purpose wouldn't have been solved with that. Giving this nice, easily relatable, quick catch up. Oh, we can see where he's at. He's losing his edge. His girlfriend's losing him. He has a desperate thing that he keeps seeing up on the radio. Fine, I'll go after this stupid ring that's always all over the news. Everyone's always looking at that. It gave that perfect arc for the character. And again, since his end was basically going to be thrusting us into the next level, you didn't need to spend any more time. I think it was, I think it was handled perfectly and visually wonderfully.
So I was wondering if it was made clear in this episode that what happened once the ship did hit the ring, that it just slowed down and he splattered against the wall for the sudden change of velocity. So it wasn't like the ring killed him with a death ray or anything like that. It was just like a sudden switch in velocity. So theoretically, if you traveled in at the correct speed, you'd be fine.
Yeah, I totally got that. Like I said, it felt like it basically caught the ship. And, from a momentum standpoint, that's the shift in momentum that often kills you more than any impact. And this was handled to the extreme. So no, I think that it was perfectly done. I think it totally related what it needed to, without, like I said, anything else. I think that visual told the story completely.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. All right. So let's briefly talk about Anna. We get a brief scene with her on the Thomas Prince. It was just like, I guess the UN, I guess it's like the big flashy diplomatic. It's like the flagship of the fleet is the impression I got.
Yeah.
And she's there as a representative, apparently Avasarala sort of. And this is something I hope we do get more information on too, because I get the impression that Avasarala trusts her now because of her help in taking down Aaron, right? And so she wanted someone whom she could trust at the ring. And so she sort of, I wouldn't say blackmailed, more like bribed her to go, saying that she'll pay for the clinic and pay for everything and have everything sort of way if she goes. And the way she puts it, it's kind of like the Godfather thing. She made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So
yeah, and I think you're right. And I think Anna being there is going to be our connection back with Avasarala. We'll have their discussions and they're weighing things out. And yeah, she's the eyes and ears. In some ways it did kind of surprise me, just in like, why are you here? You're a speechwriter, effectively. But as somebody that Avasarala can trust, and obviously she can't be going out there. She's got to, run the UN and do all of those types of works. It does sort of make sense, but I think that's what's going to be able to link those two characters together with what's happening throughout the rest of the of this alien development. And I like the captain of the ship. I like the little back and forth they have on opinions and weighing things out. And he is concerned, but he is measured. This is somebody that seems like the good temperament to have in this position. So I liked that setup. This is our command and control area. This is everything everyone's going to be, Holden's going to have to react from.
And I think it's cool to have a captain who's sort of level-headed and not like an Admiral Wynn or someone like that who's just like, jumps to the gun. So that will bring up an interesting dynamic. And they made it clear in this scene that they have no freaking idea what this ring is. And I like how he says, when she asks, what do you think? She's like, well, I just hope it's inert, because this protomolecule stuff is extremely powerful. So it's terrifying.
Yeah, and that's why I liked him. Even his approach of it, he's not looking at a molecule. This is a machine to him. This is the way that's interacting. So it gives the different points of view that are going to be looking at this. But like I said, from respectful, he is measured. He's not making any conclusions. He is waiting to see what goes on and work off of that. So I felt really good with those characters in that position there. I thought this would level heads in this position is definitely needed a lot more than say Wynn would have been in this position. Bobbleheads. Oh god. Yeah, it would have been horrible. Firing instantly.
So Iron Throne, I see in the chat you keep calling her Juliet. That was her name on Lost. On the Expanse, she's Anna. And what else was? Oh, yes, and saying that she is the religious representative in the face of the unknown. Not a bad idea to have one there. And I agree. That brings an interesting dynamic. And I like her interactions where the captain was like, "Oh, aren't you the godly type? Don't you think this is all angels?" She's like, "I didn't come here on the wings of the angels. I came here in a spaceship. I know science," but she still looks at it from more of a religious perspective.
Yeah, and again, good character standpoint. You don't have somebody who is obsessive there, somebody that can have a dialogue and an interaction. I thought was, it's good to see that from the character, especially kind of in comparison to how emotional her wife is, which obviously gives us you're gone. It was going to be for a few weeks. Now suddenly it's a few months. We're getting all these great donations, but I miss you and I'm scared for you. I get that element of the story being told. It tells us what's, the benefits of her being out here are, and the cost that it is to the family. But I did think that was an overly emotional moment there that I personally could have done without.
Oh, really? I was just going to say I like that. I actually got a bit choked up on that moment. I think it helped ground her, but that's just me.
You big softy.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, again, I get the purpose of it and so on. I just, I don't know. I was like, if you're out there, you just gotta kind of accept what she's doing here. You don't have to be all teary and run away. And I mean, that's just a personal. Personal.
Yeah, fair enough. Definitely see that point of view. All right, so from Anna, we transition to this maintenance team. Now, this is the part of the episode I personally felt a bit rushed because we get introduced to a new character, Melba, who is they refer to her as the new girl. She's doing repairs, going to different ships in the fleet and working with this repair team who seems old hat and they know what they're doing. And is the main guy there, Ren, I think he's the boss, is like showing lots of being very caring towards her and saying, "Look, I know this is jarring and I'll look out for you." So he's very well intentioned, but he's misreading her trepidation as just being nervous on the first day of the job. But we see her planting a bomb on one of the ships, and then we find out that's why she's so nervous. And then, of course, when Ren discovers the bomb, she kills him. So what was your impression of this scene? Did you feel like the introduction of this character was a bit rushed?
Well, again, I know nothing else. I don't have the books or anything to fall back on, so I don't have anything really in that sense to compare to. So I didn't pay it too much attention. I mean, I felt that obviously something was going on. And that she was going to end up being caught. I mean, I know how shows and character arcs tend to work here. So no, to me, it was just more of kind of background stuff. This is setting up whatever elements are going on. Obviously, it's not just going to be the proto-molecule machine and whatever it's doing and humanity's reaction to it. There's going to be a bunch of conflict between all the different factions that are involved, and some will be political and some will be a little bit more violent. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff to cover in this episode. So yeah, everything might have been a little rushed, but it didn't bother me that much because it's just, to me, this is again one more piece they're just sort of setting up.
Yeah, fair enough. So did you was this scene confusing to you at all when she just went crazy and started smashing the guy's head against the wall, or does that pretty much make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously she took something that seemed to power her up a little bit more. It was definitely a shocking reaction. You wonder how people are going to go off. I would think normally that she was pretending to be nervous because she was new, and in fact that she's, a highly trained killer and was just going to go off. The fact that her response was a little different. But again, it's just intriguing. It's like, wow, okay, what is this? This isn't somebody just planning a bomb, and this isn't somebody that's like an undercover agent. This is something almost entirely new, like maybe someone who's blackmailed but was given this in case that they had to react off of it, or, there are definite questions out of it. But no, I didn't necessarily find it shocking, just kind of, like I said, wow, what is this faction? What's this new thing that we're going to be
Yeah.
exposed to?
Yeah, because that is a good point, because they make a point of showing, like, I get the impression from the scene that she really did not want to kill this guy, and she genuinely felt sorrow because she kept saying, why'd you have to find it? She knew that she had to in order to protect her bomb or her mission or whatever, but I get the impression that she genuinely, like, didn't want to kill this guy.
No, I don't think that she wanted to, either. I think it was one of those where it was like she was hoping she had gotten away with it. Now, whether blowing up the ship is going to end up killing him anyway, at least you don't have to do it face to face. Something like that could be a little bit more, separated. You don't have to be quite, if you can pull the trigger from a remote, or if it's a timer, you don't have to be staring in somebody's face when they die. That's always a little bit easier.
Well, I did get the impression from this episode that they were just a maintenance crew going from ship to ship, so he might not necessarily have been on the ship when it blew.
Oh, okay. See, I thought that this was all happening on their ship.
Oh, no, because they were on the same ship as, they did specify this in subtitles, but it did go by really quick. I missed some of the subtitles in this episode, too. But they started off on Thomas Prince, which is the ship Anna's on, but then they flew to a different ship in the fleet. And so they're basically a repair team going around to all the various ships in the fleet, looking after them. So they were on a different ship at the time when she planted the bomb. They specify, I think it's like a supply ship, so not a very heavily populated one.
Sure. Okay. Well, that was something then that had kind of lost me, because I thought that she was doing this on their ship as they're going to do whatever they're doing. So that, okay. Well, that makes a little bit more sense then. If she would be moving and transitioning and setting these things up. But yeah, maybe that's one of the things of just the fast pace. I missed that.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, but I mean, overall, I did like these things. I did think they worked. I just think maybe they could have spent more time explaining it, but maybe we'll get more into this in the next episodes. Cool. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk about the Behemoth, formerly known as the Nauvoo, the big ship. We see a nice dynamic here. So Drummer, whom we know is the captain of the ship, and Naomi has left Rocinante. She's now the chief engineer, and her and Drummer shown to be pretty good friends, and they did interact quite a bit in season 2, and so I totally buy this friendship and would want to be there to help the belt. And we also get exposition that the OPA is now in a legitimate nation state, which is something that arisen that wasn't there before. It's actually quite surprising, because earlier in the season, Alva Serrala was talking shit about the OPA and saying the belt would be better off without the OPA, but now the OPA has become an official nation state, basically. And it's interesting because they're made up of a bunch of different factions and who are vying for power, so they sort of have to try to come together and compromise. And you have the two strongest factions is Fred Johnson and Anderson Dawes, and so those are the factions that vie for power over the ship. So you get Drummer, the captain, who's representing Fred Johnson, and we're introduced to a new character, Ashford, who's her first officer, who's representing Dawes. And it's interesting how they immediately clash, because these two factions, of course, don't like each other. But you see that he actually is trying to make this work. And some of the stuff he says is actually pretty good wisdom, and you can see that he's coming from a good place, but you get the impression from his backstory that this is a no good pirate that's done a lot of shady things in the past.
Yes, and I love David Strathairn. Really excited to see him in the show. I was wondering, I was like, who is it? You're trying to figure it out when they're just showing the back of the head there. Sorry. So it was, I loved seeing him in the role. And it adds this interesting dynamic. You obviously have two factions that are after each other, who have to work with each other, but don't necessarily trust. And, each side is thinking that there is some plan to be overthrown or betrayed by the other. So it's going to turn into being this great chess game. But I love Drummer and Naomi together. I love that interaction. I love the respect that they have. I love having these two powerful women kind of in charge of this ship. And now we're going to have to sort of lean on each other to see how much is Ashford going to complicate things, how much is he fall, are they going to be unite in view of a larger threat coming forward? So yeah, it keeps things interesting. And yeah, I like that Ashford is a smart but obviously dangerous character. I mean, just his persona shows how much that he has been through. But he is not an idiot, and he is insightful, and he can see things. And I mean, I always love whenever you have smart characters coming in, especially when they're going to be serving some sort of antagonistic or at least temporarily antagonistic position. It makes things so much more interesting. So yeah, I love the setup. I love the kind of back and forth they had, because in some ways Asher ends up being more civilized than how Drummer was going to react, especially when they end up with the drug exposure thing, that there has to, and that's smart because there does have to be sort of a different way than the old way going forward. So while we like Drummer and we know that she cares, she's got a strong caring for the belt, with Asher here, yeah, is he antagonistic? But is he antagonistic in a good way? Is he actually going to spur her and spur them to make better choices? I love the dynamic that they set up, and I'm glad that they spend the time to do that in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely love the introduction of this character. I'll make that clear. Like, some of the things in the episode I said I felt were a bit rushed. But here, I didn't think it was rushed at all. I think it was amazing. David Stratham's performance was great. And I just love seeing these two play off of each other, like Ashford and Drummer, and just the way that they very animated in their, like, the way they talk and their performances. And I just love it. I could eat this stuff up all day. I thought it was amazing.
Sorry, in the chat, yes, I'm talking about Ashford, not Asher. I'm glancing over to read my notes, and I have horrible handwriting. So there are new characters. I can't remember everybody's name off of it. I don't have books to go off if I have notes.
Yeah, that's fair, exactly. And it's the same sort of thing with Game of Thrones. Like, before I started reading the books, it was too hard to keep up with all these different names. So if you just get thrown all these, especially this episode throws a lot of new characters at you. So yeah, totally understandable. But yeah, so we get the thing with the drug, where Naomi sees these guys taking drugs. She's like, just keep it away from the work. But apparently saying that wasn't good enough, because he goes out and puts people in danger and gets himself killed. And so, of course, Naomi is smart enough to confess this to Drummer and say, look, this is what I saw. And then Drummer, of course, you could say overreacts, but you get the impression this is typically how the OPA functions. And we saw in the previous season where this guy challenged Fred Johnson's authority, and Fred Johnson just grabbed him and threw him out the airlock. So it seems like that's a common, like, way that the OPA is used to functioning. However, Ashford makes a really great point that if they want to be seen as a legitimate, a civilized nation, and if they want Earth and Mars to take them seriously, they're going to start having to behave differently and change their ways and be a bit more civilized. And I do get the impression of the scene, because when Drummer's making the announcement after Ashford talks her down, she says, anyone caught with any contraband after that, and Ashford sort of interrupts her and says they'll be thrown in prison. But I get the impression that he wasn't necessarily trying to undermine her, that he was actually trying to help her and trying to sort of make it clear. And he's also saying those are our captain's orders, so making it clear that he is deferring to her authority, but trying to steer her in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, he is doing exactly what a first officer is supposed to do. And yeah, I think this is going to be seeing that, what we're going to be seeing through a lot with the belt, and I think that's going to be kind of the main sub-story with the Behemoth, is this is the transition from being a ragtag group of independent pirates, political wannabes, so on, now actually being the representational military extension of a nation. Which, yeah, you're going to have rules. You're going to have civilized ways. It's a very change. This is everything that the belt has wanted, to have that level of political respect. And now they see the other side of that as well. That means that you can't just be sort of the ragtag group of do whatever you want to be's. You actually have to have uniforms, which we also see Ashford trying out there, which I thought was a lovely little bit. And, and so we've got, drummers wearing her, which feels very uniform-ish. So now you're going to see, well, at some point they're going to have to find something that's similar for everybody to go. So this is those little steps. And like I said, that's why I love Ashford as the character, as he is smart, because yeah, he does represent another faction and he is going to be challenging her, but it could be that challenging to be better, to listen to like, no, we can't do it our own ways. We have to do it this new way. And I will be here to help you with that. So yeah, I mean, I like where the dynamic is, because there is antagonism there, but they also all want the same thing. And I think that's showing how they're negotiating that field right there between the two of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that's this episode does an amazing job at establishing that they are sort of new to this and they're just trying to learn and find their ways. And I think it's really realistic. And I think even Ashford, I get the impression that even though he's played kind of antagonistic and there's sinister undertones to him, I still get the impression that his heart is in the right place and that he does want to make this work, even though there is an underlying tension there.
Well, I think with Ashford, he wants to be the captain, ultimately. And Drummer is the captain right now. So I mean, at least that's what I felt the antagonism there is. Isn't so much of that they're going to be fighting each other. It's that he's not really wanting to be the second in command. He wants to be the one in command.
Well, I saw it more as he knows that he should be the one in command because he has more experience, which I think he demonstrates in this episode. But I think he says he accepts his place for political reasons. She needs to be in command. I think from the way he acted towards the end of the episode, I get the impression that he's accepting of his role, that because of political reasons, he needs to be the first officer. So I get the impression that he is willing to fill that role, even though he feels that he actually deserves command more than she does. I think he's willing to accept that this is just the way things are.
Well, yeah, because he is smart. And again, that's what I like, even if it's just him biding his time for now. And yeah, you do. They start antagonistic by the end because he is calling her captain and this is the order. And we see that his decision is probably the best one here. You don't throw people out of the airlock. You got to throw them in the brig. There's got to be, procedure for dealing with all of this stuff. It's just like I said, he thinks he should be the captain. Yes, he's accepted to be second in command, but how long is he going to do this and how much is he going to work to kind of make himself look to be the better candidate versus Drummer? I don't really know how that relationship is going to work.
That's a very good point. That is a very good point.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's going to be the interesting thing, just to see how their relationship, fills out over the next few episodes.
Yeah, but at least in this episode, I didn't get the impression he was trying to undermine her, but that doesn't mean that he won't in the future. That if he sees a path to an advancement, he could just undermine her in order to pursue that path.
Yeah, I think that's totally the case, but he's going to do it the smart way because if he is better qualified, then he knows how to look at the long term with this. Drummer is just trying to do the best job that she can in a position that she probably didn't totally want, but now she has it.
Yeah, that's another great point. Earlier in the chat, Colonel Doomsday said that he had problems understanding what Ashford was saying. I didn't have any. I could understand it. He does have a really thick accent, but for the most part, I understood him pretty well. For me, it was the alter race girlfriend they were saying, but for Ashford, I was fine.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? You froze up on my.
Did I freeze up? Oh, I probably froze up. Now I was saying that Colonel Doomsday in the chat earlier said that he couldn't understand Ashford because of his really thick accent. But for me, I didn't have any problems understanding him. I thought he came out pretty clear. It was the belter racer is a slingshotter who I couldn't understand at all. Like I had to put on subtitles for him and his girlfriend particularly, like in order to understand what they were saying. But with Ashford, I was fine.
No, oh yeah, the racer. Yeah, I was just catching the highlights when he was speaking. I was like, look, I just want to catch the main things and just to follow the point, but I'm not gonna catch these specifics for sure. No, I just listened to David Strathairn's sweet, silky voice. Understood everything he had to say. Yeah, there was a nice accent with there, but I think with most of the stuff, with the belters, it's often just kind of catching the main general tone of where they're going, because but like a lot of these, when you're mixing up half slang and half other language and half just mixed accents, it does get a little bit confusing. But yeah, I was mostly able to stick up with them.
There's another thing I forgot to mention in my review that I noticed is that in this episode, Naomi was speaking with more of a belter accent than she ever has before.
I caught that too. I was like, whoa, she's got I don't remember her having this thick of an accent, but it's been months, so I guess she would.
Yeah, I wonder if that is a result of being around belters all the time, or if she's purposely trying to put it more and more just to blend in more and be, look, I'm more like one of you because I'm even talking like you now.
I think we'll find out when she has to deal with the Rocinante or anybody else, probably, in kind of a quiet moment, because they'll have to make a comment about it. And then we'll find out whether this is something she just picked back up because she's backing around belters, and that's sort of just the natural way of shifting your tone of speech, or if she does the honest of like, look, they feel more confident if I speak with a less of an interplanet accent than I do around you guys. So yeah, I think that's interesting character stuff. But yeah, I totally caught that. It was a little surprising. Sounded great, but surprising.
I don't think it was too jarring. I think it was subtle enough where it wasn't like it seemed natural. So I did like it. I think it did work and make a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. And what else? Oh, yeah. In the chat, they were talking about how, because in the books, they're different. None of these characters here, except for Ashford, we have totally different characters that they're sort of blending into Naomi and Drummer. And as people were trying to say, oh, who's who. But I don't think it's a one comparison. I made a comment about this. You can find a lot of character traits from all four different book characters into these three characters. You're sort of meshing them together and sort of spreading it out. So I don't think you could point to one person and say, oh, Naomi's bull and Drummer's paw or something like that. I think they're all they're just meshing it up and meshing it around and making this new thing.
Amalgamations.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's working really well with this aspect. Because in the novels, Ashford was actually the captain, and he was incompetent and didn't know what he was doing. So they sort of changed that around, where he's the first officer, and he does know what he's doing. So just switching everything up, which is pretty interesting.
Sure. But I think they work well with adding him on as the new character and having the other two characters are ones we're familiar with, because otherwise, it starts to get to be way too many names to juggle, and we immediately have emotional connections with whatever their storylines are. So I think that oftentimes the chance for TV shows to build on what the books have originally played out work really well, especially in a lot more modern adaptations. I think that there's a defter hand at condensing storylines and saying, all right, this person we have here, they're going to play character A's story arc for this point, and then they'll do character B's because that'll make an easier transition, and we'll have this person do this, and we'll shrink these three people down into this one, so we don't have all these different actors we got to keep track of. So I think they've done a good job of reading what was laid out and then being able to streamline it. Because, it definitely made this episode feel a lot less jarring than if there were 3 or 4 or 5 more characters they were trying to introduce.
And not one who we're familiar with who's there. Like if we get the whole thing with the behemoth, we don't know anyone there, it's going to seem a bit jarring. And to be frank, that's how it felt in the books when I was reading the first book. Like I didn't know any of these characters, so it was hard to get my bearings. Whereas the show, I think it did a better job of sort of blending, pushing you into it, where you could you have at least Naomi's there and the drummers there. Although I will say I'm still a bit iffy on Naomi's involvement. I would rather see her back on the Rossi, but we'll see. Maybe they'll justify it going forward.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we want the Rossi crew together. You know, that's how they all work the best, and they have the great interaction. And I think maybe that's again how we start to connect. This is what allows us to connect these various different points together, as having these little characters that we know. So yeah, and once Naomi kind of serves her purpose as our transition, then I don't mind if she leaves, and now we're just dealing with Ashford and Drummer on the Behemoth. Now that I have a connection with them, now that I know what their dynamic is, then yeah, you don't necessarily need this other character. So, I mean, they could play it either way. I would be fine if Naomi stays on there. I like her the interaction with Drummer. On the other hand, always like her back with the Rossi crew. I think the Rossi crew is stronger together as opposed to being spread out. So maybe we'll even get Bobby back on the Rossi. I don't know. Yeah. I'm fine with that. I like the crew that we had at the end of last book, you know.
Yeah. Definitely. But yeah, it's also cool to shake things up. And yeah, I absolutely agree that this is a really good adaptation. And you're right, in more recent times they've been a lot better at adapting long books or stuff into TV shows. Someone in the chat mentioned earlier, I think it was Deanna, that she actually prefers the show to the books. And I definitely don't take sides. I like them both. I'm not going to say one's better than the other, but there's aspects I like from one that's better than the other, which I thought anyway. Did I brink out again? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you just kicked for a second, but you're back.
I'm back. Okay, cool. Great. Yeah, the screen froze for just a minute there. Oh yes, and Iron Tron also points out that the writers of the book, the co-authors who wrote the books, are actively involved in making the show. So that actually would help a lot with how it's transitioning and the choices that they make.
Yeah, because I'm sure always you have authors that look, it's like, well, if I could have done it again, maybe I would have tightened this up. I would have done this a little bit different. So yeah, whenever you have an author involved in a production, as long as there's not too much ego involved anywhere, then I think it always lends a better transition between the book and the adaptation.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we pretty much covered everything in this episode then. So I think we can go ahead and look for wrapping this discussion up. So just any thoughts on what you hope to see in the next episode? If we saw I don't know if you saw the promo for the next episode, but it was focused entirely on Miller, so that's definitely going to be a factor. But yeah, any thoughts, any hopes?
Well, I mean, I just want them to keep the pacing that they have developed, you know, and I've got a lot of faith in that. That's why I thought this episode worked very well, because while it was reintroducing us in the characters and where they are, I thought that it moved well and got to a great point. I think we'll probably have less focus on just Miller than what the previews show for next episode. I think that's the tease and that is the grab, but I'm hoping that we get a little bit more action from what is happening, and I want to get our elements coming together around the ring and getting some discussion going on with that, because we might see whatever the next step is of this ring next episode. I think maybe we'll get more hints and then probably bring it up as we get closer towards the end, you know, the following episode or so on. So I just want to get these elements. I just want to get these pieces together. I just want the pacing to keep forward. I just don't want them to drag anything out. And they haven't really been doing that. So I feel really confident. I'm just really curious what is going to be coming through that ring, because I see a ring like that. I think Stargate. I think Gateway. It's definitely reacting when you get close. So that's kind of the exciting point that I'm really looking forward to, is seeing just what is going to be coming through there.
Miller is back. Yeah, I agree. That was more of a grab. I don't think that's what the whole episode is going to be about, but they're just trying to grab you back in. But no, that's cool. It is great seeing Thomas Jane on the show again. So I am really excited about that. I think you're right that the pacing is good, and I hope that they keep this up and not get a bit too bogged down and set up in filler, but at the same time, I do want a bit more establishment of this new censor. With any show, whenever they do a time jump, I always find it a bit jarring. Like Vikings, I don't know if you ever watched that show. They jump forward like 10 years in the future sometimes, like instantly. And Battlestar Galactica had like a year jump, which I thought was very mishandled. That was very jarring to me. This actually is better in comparison, I believe. But I still would love taping after this time jump of this new dynamic, but in a way that's not bogged down or feels too slow.
Yeah, I'm thinking they'll probably do a 50-50. They'll do a half episode of catching up with kind of history and so on, and the other half of moving the story forward. So we can still keep that pace going, but they can start filling in the bits. We'll probably get a little discussion between Anna and Avasarala, which might give into why Guile ended up, the old Secretary General ended up leaving. I could see where that little dialogue would probably come out. We obviously have with Miller, and that's going to bring the rest of the Rossi crew interacting, and they're going to have to try and hide it from the documentary crew that there's this dead detective up in Holden's crew quarters. So that's going to make an interesting dynamic, and maybe we'll start to see a little bit more of what's the documentary crew is behind, or at least the cameraman is kind of going after right there. So yeah, I think we'll get definitely more forward motion with the story, but yeah, I think they'll heavily peppered in with a lot of our backstory to kind of it'll be easier to kind of keep everyone together. I think that way, giving us the backstory that we haven't gotten yet, but still able to bring the story forward pace-wise.
Cool. Absolutely. So overall, this episode, you thought it was a good one? Really enjoyed it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Again, it's not action-packed. It was transitional for me, but I thought that it was handled well. I liked the new characters that were in. I liked where it ended up. Sure, I have questions, but I feel confident those will be filled in and those will be answered. And it really gets me more excited for next week, because now I'm like, great, what is this ring? What is it doing? What is this? Is it a gateway? Is it not? And why is Miller here? It's got questions going. So I think it really served its purpose well.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Anyway, we'll go ahead and end this discussion here. Thank you guys so much for joining in the chat. We got Jim Reaper, our Iron Trone, Belinda, Cardinal Doomsday, Jim. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And of course, anyone watching us in the archives, thank you so much for sticking through. And Darrin, thank you so much for joining. Pleasure as always to do these discussions. You can go ahead and let people know what's going on with you and your channel and what you're up to.
All right. Well, thanks, Mark. As always, I really do have a blast chatting with this show with you. It's always so much fun. Let's see. We just finished up Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We will be seeing a season 6. Won't be till next summer, so a long wait for that. But we are in the middle of Westworld, which is very exciting. A lot of stuff happening with that. Legion, amazing, blowing away show. Just insanely well done. So you can catch reviews of those shows on my channel. That is D's Reviews. We're also doing Fear the Walking Dead, which is okay. And we have Preacher coming up this summer, so which is just a blast, season 3 with that. So really looking forward to that return. And of course, I'll be doing some more Expanse discussions with Mark. So keep an eye open for that.
Cool. Yeah. I was wondering, because I heard you say a few weeks back you might drop Fear the Walking Dead. You decided to stick with it?
There are one or two really new of the new characters which are interesting. I like them. I was curious to see where they would go a little bit more. And I hate to drop something in the middle of a season. I mean, I'd at least like to try and finish it out if at all possible. So yeah, there was some good character stuff that dragged me back, and then they made some other choices recently that made me want to go, well, screw you. So They're off this week. We'll catch next weekend and see if they do stupid stuff or they stay smart. So they've got a couple choices they got to make, and it really depends on where they go with that. Is going to depend on if it interests me enough to spend time doing reviews.
Yeah, that seems my relationship with the whole show overall. I'll watch it once the season's finished and give my overall review, but we'll see how that goes. I did drop reviewing a show once in the middle of the season. It was Orphan Black with their last season. I was just like, nah, screw this. I'm not going to waste my time with this show. But yeah, you always don't want to do that. But yeah.
Yeah, whatever possible. Yeah, I've got a little bit of Orphan Black. I still have seasons to catch up with. There's too much good TV to waste time on TV that doesn't grab you. I mean,
yeah,
honestly,
exactly.
There's so much really good stuff out there.
I'm still wanting to watch Legion because I hear so many great things, but I haven't seen any of it yet. So I'm still trying to find time to get into that show.
Yeah, season 1 is a near perfect season. Season 2 has been good. It's got a couple episodes that grab a little bit more, a little less, but from a visual storytelling standpoint, I've never seen anything handled as deftly as this show is. There you go, Cardinal. Deftly again. Is it just me? Did we lose Mark? He's frozen on my page. Do you guys catching me? I'm not sure if we... Okay, there he goes. Now you're back.
I hear now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I got you.
All right, cool. All right, go ahead and this before I blink out again. But in the chat, Colonel was saying that they missed, and Belinda was saying they missed Atkin. Yeah, Atkin and Don were on vacation this weekend. Hopefully they'll be back next week. Maybe. We'll see. Hopefully. Anyway, if you're finding me for the first time, I'm Mark. My channel's Enchantment of Eternity. I do reviews of The Expanse every week as long as these wonderful discussion videos, and also cover other shows like Star Trek and Babylon. My Babylon 5 Season 4 review should be coming out soon. And I'm currently in the process of reviewing every Star Trek movie. This week, I don't have any clever quips or anything because it's Insurrection, which is a boring movie. But I'll explore how boring that movie is. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.